we live in today, you've got interest rates going up, you've got inflation continuing to go through the roof, fuel prices are going up, who knows if there's going to be a war tomorrow. All these things influence business and you have zero control over any of them. So what do you do? In this video, I want to share with you our strategies around when you can't predict the future. And yes, that sounds a little bit silly. Who on earth can predict the future? Do we sit back passively and go, well, there's nothing we can do, I'm not going to do anything? Are you no longer going to employ that new salesperson because you're worried there's going to be a war breaking out in Europe the next day? What happens if you invest in a whole new range of vehicles to deliver your product and interest rates go up the next day? How can you make objective decisions in a subjective world? I'm a bit of a cricket nerd, and apologies for people watching this video in our non-cricket playing nations, but I remember reading about a concept that they had when they were a dominant team about 20 years ago, and they used a simple phrase, control the controllables. Essentially what they're saying is don't worry about the things you can't control. You could be playing a game in conditions that aren't favourable to how you would like to play. You've still got to play the game. How can you relate this to your business? Because in sport, you could play a bad game or even a bad performance within a game, but you've still got the chance to come back and perform either better later in the game, but there's that ability to bounce back. In business, we may not have that luxury. One or two bad strategic decisions could mean that you're out of business. You don't get that luxury of a second or a third chance you may have in a sporting environment. How on earth can I make an informed decision around anything when I don't have a crystal ball telling me what the future's got in store for us? I'm going to share with you the process where you can be very formulaic in your approach to come to a conclusion and take action in a way that gives you a higher degree of confidence around guesswork and whether I should do this or sitting in the corner and doing nothing. We're going to take the knowledge and data you know for sure, so objective data, and use this for the subjective scenario we're facing, which is trying to predict the future. What's the best decision we can make? There's 6 steps. Let's get started. The first step is understanding your break-even. We have a free course on our website, and we're going to include the link below, which goes into a deep dive around the break-even process. For the purpose of this video though, we're going to simply say, these are the elements which go into your break-even, and assume you know how to calculate them yourself. Ultimately, there's 2 elements which make up your break-even. All of your fixed costs, which include your fixed cost of goods sold, your overheads, your loan repayments, your owner's drawings, any other buffer you want to include in there. And the other side of the equation is your contribution margin. Your contribution margin being what is your revenue minus your variable costs of goods sold and giving you a percentage. So when you get your total fixed costs and divide that by your contribution margin, that will give you your break-even sales. You can calculate this number either on your historical data, what your break-even is as at today, or what your projected break-even is going to be based on making additional investments, adding people to your team, going into a bigger premises. That's step 1. The second step, and this is also an objective step, understanding what our sales in are at today. Sales in are potentially orders which have already been booked but we haven't yet delivered an invoice of them to the client. They might be projects that we've won. It might be ongoing work that we're going to be delivering. Or if you're running in a retail space or an online space, it might be based on an element of traffic that you get to your property, i.e. your retail store, or to your website that can help you to predict your future and other indicators around your sales in. So what is your sales in data telling you today? And what you'll find, comes as no surprise, you'll be able to strongly predict maybe your next week and your next month. The projections for 6 months' time might not have the degree of confidence that you have with your next month or 2. The reason we say this is objective rather than subjective is your sales in number should come from a reliable and trusted source, not just some number that's plucked from the air that you hope to win. The third step is looking at what our break-even sales are versus our sales in. This can be compared against what are our sales in as at today. What do we think our sales in might be in 6, 12, 24 months time? And also asking ourselves questions like, what would happen if our sales fell by 40%? This leads us to the fourth step in the process. What do you believe is the absolute worst case scenario your business could face? Now, this might seem like a silly question because obviously the worst case scenario is down to zero. You have no revenue, you have no business at all. And conversely, you might speak with somebody who's hyper unrealistic and go, we're never going to have any problems, we're going to continue to grow, we're going to continue to kick goals and progress from there. It's a very wide band. You could have somebody who says, no, we're going to constantly grow, let's say plus 15%, to another person who's minus 100% where we're down at zero. What on earth do you do in those situations? I would use what is defined as the median of those numbers. So yes, it's possible that you could go all the way down to zero for your revenue, but it is also possible that you could continue to grow in spite of what's happening in the world. I would look at, in consultation with members of your team, research that you do, what would you say would be the most likely thing that could happen? And yes, you might have to drill into what your clients are like. What are their buying habits? If you're selling luxury vehicles and we go into recession, there's probably a good chance that your sales will dip. But there might be historical data you can look at. There's always going to be outliers, but at the same time, there should be enough research and data you have within your business and within your industry that can give you an understanding of what you think a likely or most likely scenario could be. Now we move to step 5, and this is where we start to blend the objective information with the subjective information. And this is what we call mind your step. Mind your step between what your break-even sales are as at today and what you project your sales to be in the future. So you're taking the objective data of what your break-even sales are as at today with your subjective data of where you believe your business will go. And you might have a best case, which let's say might be minus 10%, a most likely or the median case we said before, and that might be minus 40%. And then you could go, hey, the economy and our industry is absolutely going to get hit by a tidal wave and it's going to reduce by 60%. You can look at what the gap is between your break-even sales and those projected numbers. You might be running a business at the moment where your break-even sales is so low, which is a good thing, in comparison to what you're still projecting. There might be still a positive gap between those numbers. A positive gap being your projected sales being greater than your break-even sales. It's highly unlikely for a business they will be able to still have a positive gap between those numbers if their business was to reduce by 40%, for example. But it's important to understand what the gap is, because what the gap is then allows us to move to the last step, which is step 6. Step 6 is decision time. And that phrase we said at the start, how can we make objective decisions in a subjective environment, in a subjective situation? We've established what our break-even sales are and what our projected sales are going to be, regardless of what happens in the world, whether an atomic bomb goes off, whether inflation goes to 40%, whether unemployment goes to 30%, regardless of what happens, we've put together an informed estimate of where our sales are going to go. And then it comes down to really 2 things. What can we change within our break-even? If we can't increase sales and we've assumed that we've exhausted every single avenue in relation to increasing our sales, and I understand that that's probably a little bit unrealistic, you'll never exhaust every single avenue, but for the purpose of this, we say we have. The only way you can reduce your break even is to increase your contribution margin, i.e. sell your product with less material cost associated with it, or less variable cost associated with it, or reduce your fixed costs. You can get creative. What are the things that you could do to reduce the costs within your business? An example of someone we worked with during the GFC, and it's now 15 years ago, which is a little bit scary, but back at that time, someone we worked with loved their team. They did not want to lose the people they had on their team, but they spoke to them, and with how the economy was positioned at the time, they were all happy to work for 60% of their pay. which meant they worked 3 days a week. There wasn't the volume of work coming through the door which would sustain all of them to work 5 days a week. And yes, they did lose a couple of people, but what they were able to do is protect the core nucleus of that team while also reducing their break-even sales. The other side is how long can your business sustain having a negative gap between your break-even and your projected sales. Yes, that relies on how deep your pockets are and how willing is the ownership group to go on that ride and carry that cost. Again, it might be for the same reasons. I want to keep my team. I want to keep the people in place that we have currently and sustain that, or keep investing in our marketing, keep investing in areas of our business, knowing that there's a point in the future where we will reap the rewards. But again, that comes with the luxury of building equity over a period of time. Also, that is an objective decision. If you can project what your gap is going to be, you can work out how much cash you're going to need to survive that period of time. In summary, these are the things we need to do. Step 1, know your break even. This is an objective factor. Step number 2, what are our sales in? This is also an objective factor because we're going to be using data that we trust and from sources that we can rely upon. The third step is what is the gap between our break-even sales and our projected sales in currently. The fourth step is what do we believe is the absolute worst case scenario business could fall in, even in the most horrendous of business conditions, and then look at the median of those numbers. One step further than that, you can look at a best, a most likely, and a worst case scenario. The fifth step is mind the gap. Once we know those factors of what the worst case, median, and best case of the future is, what is the gap between our break even, the objective number, and our projected sales, the subjective element? And lastly, that leads to decision time. What decisions and changes do we have to make to either reduce our break even down, or what costs are we willing to incur over a period of time which is going to eat into our equity? There you go. That's the strategy. There's no need for a crystal ball, and yes, there is a world where you can take objective data in a subjective world to make informed decisions.